How's everybody going? Backseat economist here. As you can see, the weather is not improved in any way since my last video. It's colder and now it's snowing. But because it's snowing, I figured what a great backdrop for my next video here. So as promised, I was waiting until the Fed speech, Jerome Powell's Fed speech on Wednesday, to make my next video. I want to see what their direction and thoughts were on the economy before I kind of spoke on Janet Yellen's own assessment and her speech from last Wednesday before last. As we know, she's the Treasury Secretary, Jerome Powell being the Fed Reserve Chairman. So speaking on Yellen's speech and where she wanted to see the economy for the country move, and how she kind of planned on getting there. And the first video was about where she saw us at the moment, and this one's going to be about the part of her speech where she spoke on where she'd like to see us go and how we plan on getting there. We ended it with the thought of her switching from a quote-unquote old supply side economics to a new supply side economics, where the focus in the market would be on bolstering the labor supply, and allowing the human capital to experience both an increase in education, quality of living, and access to education that would allow them access then to higher paying jobs and, of course, higher wages. They also wanted to, they say they would like to overhaul public infrastructure, but so far that has mainly involved them trying to work in different ways to increase our renewable energy. Essentially, the sun, the solar production, the wind production, the nuclear production, all the renewable energies that we say we'd like to implement, that we have yet to do so. They are kind of tying a lot of that into the quote-unquote infrastructure ideas that they have, and it's not a terrible idea. I do think we have some issues with the climate changing. Whether or not it's natural, I think, is up for debate. But it is changing, and it has definitely some effect on the economy. And I plan on actually making a whole separate video on that topic alone. But of the concerns that she had, that she wanted to address, it was all based on how to improve human capital. So, and in addition to that, of course, how to improve the environment through increase in the renewable technologies. One of the big things that she pointed to was the child care cost, and the how we are going to alleviate the cost of child care, because in their eyes, in the Biden administration's eyes, that's one of the biggest blocks to people entering the labor force right now, is the actual cost for their children to be cared for while they're working. I think the shift to virtual jobs is probably going to help that in many ways, because obviously if you can stay home and work, you probably don't need childcare as intensely as if you were leaving the home. But it still is a concern, because many people would still like the younger children who are below preschool age to get some sort of education, and so they want to actually expand 2 additional years for childcare. So starting at age 5 now instead of age 6 and 7. So they want to expand the ages of people, of kids who are actually able to get childhood education, and I think that's a good idea. I'm not against it. It's going to be our dollars that pay for it, and we'll see how it goes. But in my eyes, essentially, I think it's something that is worth a shot, because this is clearly a problem in our country at the moment. Child care, the ages that they can receive it, and how much it costs for them to receive it. In many cases, I know, like in my own family, we find that having both parents work actually costs more because of the care that would need to be provided for any children left at home while both parents work. So in our case, we either have one parent stay home, or in my case, we do a off and on where I work during the day and my spouse works at night. And that's a rough schedule to maintain. So I definitely can feel for other families who are in a similar situation. The Jerome Powell speech was interesting. That was on Wednesday. That's what I was waiting for, and essentially was what I thought it would be. The Fed is planning on raising interest rates, and he mainly focused the speech on how he planned to do that. So the focus was going to be, in his words, on a steady decline of the balance sheet of the Fed. And what he meant by that was they have a large balance sheet right now of securities that they've been buying over the years. And to kind of backtrack from there, that's part of the quantitative easing program, where they've been buying securities from banks in order to allow the banks to take that cash that they sold the security for and go ahead and lend it out. That was the idea. But now the actual Fed has the balance sheet full of securities that they need to slowly sell back to banks in order to tighten the monetary supply back up and get a control of inflation. A lot of the blame is still going towards the supply chokes. The supply chain chokes are receiving much of the blame of our inflation issues. I don't know how much it actually is to blame. I know it's definitely a significant factor, but we can't rule out the fact that the trillions of dollars we've pumped into our economy over the past several decades has definitely lowered the value, devalued our currency, and definitely spurred on many areas of this higher prices that we're seeing across all areas, all goods. And not all goods in all areas are seeing supply side chokes. So I can't fully accept that as the total blame, but of course, them being, again, elected officials, they need to effectively shift the blame from policy as much as they can towards outside factors out of their control. So I'm not surprised. But the Powell speech, the interesting part of it to me was that he was a little more aggressive than I thought he would be. He was blatantly speaking on raising the federal funds rate, which typically tends to freak out markets. When you start talking about raising the federal funds rate and effectively then raising the market interest rates, which would follow, that's what the stock market starts to freak out about, because you're telling them that you're going to start making it more expensive to borrow money, and you're kind of shutting off that faucet of free, cheap money. So I was surprised that he was as aggressive in speaking on raising that rate, but he made it clear, and I'm happy he did, because I think it's very much so necessary. I think they could even actually be more aggressive. I think they're still being a little bit too soft as far as I think quantitative easing could end immediately right now. They don't want to actually have it end until March. So that means between now and March, they are still going to be purchasing securities. They're just slowing that buying process down until it gets down to zero. And then they will start to reverse and then start to actually sell securities back to banks and raise the federal funds rate. So we're still talking about not actually seeing the tightening happening until at least midsummer. It's too long for me. I really could care less about how much the stock market doesn't appreciate the tightening of the money supply. The average person, I think, could care less also, because like we spoke about in my last video, the average person does not hold a majority of the assets and stocks and interest in major companies in this country. It's mainly the top 2 and 1%. The actual population that this is looking to affect, both Yellen's policies and Powell's policies, is the general population, not the top 1% and 2%, because they understand that the general population is what drives the consumer consumption of this company, and that's what drives our real growth. And so they understand that if we don't have disposable income, that it doesn't really matter how much richer the top 1% or 2% become. They're not going to, that their spending habits aren't going to change in such a way that we're going to see a real growth in GDP, other than nominally, but not actually backed by products and manufactured goods. And that's the real growth that we spoke about last time, that export-import ratio. That's the real growth we need to look for. So I'm actually, like I said in the previous video, I'm kind of rosy on both of their ideas on where we need to go, paying both a larger commitment towards increasing the education and the infrastructure for the common man, the common worker, increasing the ability to work and work outside the home by allowing children to be cared for, both making that cheaper and allowing them to be cared for earlier in life. I'm fully backing those policies. The only problem is, how do we pay for them? And it's been shown in the past that the government's very inefficient at paying for things like this. They're very inefficient with our tax money in general. And so having the government be the instrument to have these things actually exist and have these things actually be carried out is typically the least efficient method. The free market is typically a better method. Government really taking a more hands-off approach is generally the better method, but there hasn't been any major investment in human capital in a long time by any administration. And so if they actually do what they say they're going to do, I am interested to see the results. I don't know if the benefit will outweigh the costs and the inefficiency of those trying to implement the ideas, but I guess we don't have much of a choice, because we have this president, this administration, for another 2 years, and Jerome Powell will probably be with the Fed for at least another 4 or 5. So this is where we're headed. This is where we're going, and if you don't like it, I'd say maybe write to your senator or congressman, but I'm willing to wait and see what happens. Powell said also that he wants to see the economy essentially get back to pre-pandemic levels, both in production, both in inflation, and also in the labor market. I think that's going to be tough, because if the Treasury Department's looking to essentially switch from taxing capital to from taxing labor to taxing capital, this new supply side economics. So instead of taxing the tax burden being on the middle class common man, it's going to be on the corporations and the those that hold assets in this country. That typically does not spur production. That typically does not spur major growth in the short run in any economy, and not in our history, in our country. I think it's going to be tough to have us get back to the Trump administration's policies, the levels that we were at under the Trump administration's policy, the levels of inflation, the levels of production, the levels of labor force participation. I think it's going to be tough for us to get back to those numbers under a completely different administration that's almost going the completely opposite way in how they want to regulate and handle the open market and economy. I think it's going to be very tough. I don't know how it's going to be done. Quite honestly, I don't think the Fed can do it on their own. All they can do is affect monetary policy. The other half to it is fiscal policy, and that is the executive and legislative branches. Mainly it's supposed to be the legislative, but it's turned into the executive. Although I'd like for it to work out, and I'm interested to see if it will work out, I don't think Biden's policies, administration policies, are very favorable for Powell's views to come to fruition, at least not in the short run. And that's the problem, is we're always working in the short run. Every 4 years, we're electing you know, a new administration, or we're reelecting the same administration who has totally different, possibly totally different base ideas backing them in their last 4 years, and now no longer want to pursue the same policies or kind of change up, or, you know, there's all kinds of politics is such a rabbit hole. There's all kinds of reasons why administrations do and don't follow up on the things that they should be, but the short run is typically what kills this country, is that we're never able to actually follow a long-term plan. We're always looking for these little short-run spurts of production to be able to say that your administration fell over this amount of unemployment and this amount of production and this amount of GDP growth, and that's all they're really looking for, is that feather in their cap. In the long run is typically where you see the actual growth, the actual effects of these policies. So it would be nice if we could get to a point where we could actually see, you know, 8, 12, 16 years of similar policies, similar approaches to the economy, so that we could actually have a long-term growth strategy followed. Who knows if that'll ever happen again with the way the two different parties kind of collide now. I don't know if that kind of collaboration could happen ever again, but in any case, that is kind of my take on what she had to say and what he had to say, and whether or not I think that actually come true. I'd love to hear comments. I'd love to hear ideas. I plan on doing, of course, more videos about these different topics, diving into these different ideas of, you know, the child care thing is again, a whole separate issue in itself, and why child care costs are the way they are. It's actually a very fascinating subject. So until next time, everybody stay warm, stay dry, and we'll be speaking soon.